Considering how many conflicts have happened throughout the entirety of the Star Wars galaxy, I'm surprised nobody seems to talk about the Confederacy of Independent Systems, more commonly known as the Separatists. They were a major player in the galaxy, and while the faction as a whole was one big sham made by Sheev to create a conflict to allow him to gain power within the Republic and eventually reform it into the Empire, they had some pretty good stuff. And today we're talking about one of those cool things. Today we're talking the Hyena class droid fighter bomber. But starting with the history, as the opening narration of the classic Clone Wars movie states,
"A galaxy divided!"
The Republic and Separatists are now in full-scale war after the first climactic battle of Geonosis, and to be honest, I don't think either side was truly prepared for it. I mean, let's think for a moment. The Republic hasn't had a standing army ever since the Ruusan Reformation, and CIS is mainly a coalition of planets with corporate heads at the top. And suddenly they have massive armies that need supplies, warships, and starfighters. And it's in this department that our story begins, because when the war broke out, the CIS didn't have anything that could be considered a bomber. The Vulture class droid starfighter was more of an interceptor, and the Geonosian fighters were only stationed on, well, Geonosis. So the Separatist leaders went to Factoid Armor Workshop and asked them if they could make a starfighter bomber for them. Now, Factoid wasn't new to the battle droid game. They'd been making battle droids for the Trade Federation for a good long while, but now they needed to make a new craft. So instead of making a completely new design from scratch, they decided to take a much more French approach to their bomber. Take a fighter design, scale it up, and modify it until it fulfills the role. Saves time, money, and gets a solid result because you already know the fighter is a good design. So Factoid went over to Horchal Engineering, took the specs of the Vulture droid, scaled it up, made it wider and sturdier, and introduced the Hyena class droid bomber to the galaxy. Costing 120,000 credits fresh off the assembly line, the Hyena measured 12.48 meters long and 3.1 meters tall, making it much larger and wider than its Vulture brother. However, even though it's bigger, it's still fairly maneuverable, making it a multi-class in a fighter role as well. However, even with its redesign and modifications, it's easy to spot the shared DNA it has with the Vulture, mainly in its hull shape, wings, and head. However, unlike the Vulture, the main body of the Hyena features two pods rather than a singular one. The rightmost pod serves as the main head, and functions similarly to the Vulture, being able to extend and look around. Meanwhile, the left pod houses a downward sensor and uses all of its computer power for bombing and ordnance data for the Hyena, allowing it to fulfill its role as a bomber. The twin hull design is also somewhat reminiscent of future bomber designs, such as the TIE bomber. Another aspect that the Hyena shared with its brother was its wings. The Hyena featured the same ground walking capabilities, where its legs would fold below the body and become a set of 4 legs for the fighter to stand on. However, unlike the Vulture, whose legs were completely solid in walking mode, the Hyena's legs would split halfway up the length in a separate joint, giving the Hyena much more flexibility. Not only did this allow Hyenas to walk on the hull of the ship, saving room inside the hangar for other vessels, but also allowed it to lower its body to reload and refuel. Speaking of reloading, the Hyena was quite heavily armed. Underneath its hull, it could mount 6 concussion missiles, 6 proton torpedoes, and 4 proton bombs, giving it a lot more firepower than its Republic counterpart, the Y-Wing, which could only carry 6 to 10 proton torpedoes and an unknown amount of bombs. In addition, the Hyena had a pair of laser cannons on its upper hull, tacked in a starfighter role if the need arose. However, the final, and in my opinion, most interesting aspect about this bomber is its name. The Hyena droid bomber actually had a very specific vocoder for its voice. The designers often stated that it made it sound like it was laughing like a hyena, which I could very much see as a psychological tool. Just imagine, you're a clone trooper in a trench and all of a sudden the bombers above you start laughing maniacally like the Joker. Terrifying. The Hyena served valiantly throughout the entirety of the Clone Wars. However, once the shutdown command was given and the Separatists were effectively completely disbanded, it seemingly disappeared off the face of the galaxy. While the Y-Wing gained fame across the galaxy in the hands of the Rebellion, the Hyena just faded away. Its wreckage scattered across whole star systems, waiting for some enterprising Jawa to scavenge it for parts to scavenge up a few credits. A fate that is rather common for a lot of Separatist ships. The Hyena is one of the CIS creations that just never came back after the closing act of the Clone Wars. Part of me hopes that the Hyena and its Vulture brother may get some love in the future sometime, but knowing how Star Wars is going, that's an unlikely possibility. However, that is all I have time for today. Bit of a sour note to end on, I know, but 'tis the fate of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Like, comment, subscribe, and do all the good stuff. Until next time, This is Nerd Trooper, signing off.